Hello and welcome back to FATBOSS TV. Today we're having a look at another boss from the Tomb of Sargeras. We're looking at Kil'jaeden from the 725 PTR.
So Kil'jaeden is the very last boss in the Tomb of Sargeras, and in Margok-like fashion it's a 3-phase encounter with 2 intermission phases. Now the fight takes place on his command ship on a very small platform, and as the fight goes on and you travel through space, it does seem that eventually you're going to end up in Argus. Now before we go into anything, do keep in mind that this is a testing preview. All the boss visuals and even abilities may change before this boss is released, and do expect a full guide when this boss hits live servers in a couple of weeks' time. Now while we were testing this boss, we only managed to get into phase 2, so that means we can only really theorize about the second intermission phase and the final phase, but we will cover that in this video and we will talk about it. However, if this boss is in fact tested again, we'll cover that all in a new video if that unlikely situation arises. But anyway, let's go straight into it. Let's talk about phase 1.
Now right from the outset of phase 1, tanks will be hit regularly by Fell Claws. This is a 9-second buff applied to the boss that causes his melee attacks to debuff tanks with a 50% physical damage increase for 25 seconds. Now this effect stacks pretty fast on the tank, and it does mean they're going to be taking an extremely high amount of damage. 3 or more stacks would definitely force your tanks to keep some form of active mitigation up, or a DR, just for the next hits. With 2 tanks, we found taunting around 5 was the lowest possible stack to allow the previous stacks to drop. And as problematic as this sounds, you could just 3-tank it, as this would keep your stacks below 3. To add, this buff on Heroic and Mythic also makes each melee attack during the Fell Claws act as a frontal cleave, so as a result the boss must be faced away at all times. Now for the raid to deal with is the Shadow Reflections. The boss will mark 3 players with an 8-second debuff. Once this expires, an ad will spawn from the location of each of those debuff players. Now these ads just spam Erupting Dreadflame. This is a long cast that deals ever increasing amounts of damage for each of its casts. Now on Heroic and above, each of the casts will also buff all of the other shadow ads within 20 yards, increasing their damage by a massive amount. So the idea is that you'll spawn the ads 20 yards away from each other and just kill them before they cast too many times. However, we found that during testing you could just stack them up and kill them off before they even cast once. It's unlikely you'll be able to do this on live, but during testing they had no health at all.
Also on a timer for everyone else to deal with is Rupturing Singularity. This initially will spawn right in the center of the platform, and after 6 seconds or so, a meteor will land in the landing zone and instantly kill anyone stood inside it. Everyone outside the landing zone will be knocked back a far distance and take a moderate burst of damage. To avoid completely falling off the platform, you need to stand pretty close to it. However, the landing area is actually much larger than the animation, so as it stands you need to be really careful and make sure that you're not too close, otherwise you'll just be one shot. The important thing that you need to know about this ability in regards to its knockback is that the knockback effect is enough to completely knock you off the platform unless you're fired into the corners of the square. So if you're fired directly to one of the sides, you'll almost certainly fall off and die. After the very first singularity, all subsequent zones will actually spawn in one of the 4 corners of the platform, and providing you react and move towards them quickly, they're far easier to deal with because you just have so much more room to be knocked back into, so of course there's less chance you'll actually fall off. But the single most important mechanic that you have to deal with, and the one that we guess you'll spend most progression on in this phase, is Armageddon. On a timer the boss will spawn multiple meteors around the room that will impact 7 seconds later. There are lots of little ones and there's one single big one. If any meteors, regardless if they're big or small, hit the ground, they'll do next to lethal damage to the entire raid, but if that doesn't kill you off, it also applies a really nasty dot. So essentially it's a wipe if they land, so you're forced to soak them. The small meteors can be soaked by a single player that take a small burst of damage and then receive a 60-second dot, and the big meteors deal far more damage and will in fact instantly kill anyone without a very large damage reduction or an immunity. This damage is however physical. In the dungeon journal it's listed as a mechanic that tanks should deal with. We found it far easier in a larger raid size just to have people use immunities instead. Now interestingly, the boss will call these meteors in every 50 seconds or so. This means if you soak the first time around and you wish to soak again for a second time, your dot's timer won't run out and you'll simply refresh it and gain another stack. This is far from ideal and it simply just puts strain on your healers, so ideally what you'll want to do is take turns at soaking. You could potentially set up groups, but that would probably be quite messy.
You'll probably want to do it on the fly, really.
Yeah, so doing it on the fly is probably the best way of doing it, and ultimately it's better that you go out there and get that second stack than just letting it explode. And that's all it is for this phase. You need to just make sure you deal with all those abilities as they're thrown at you, and then eventually he'll enter his first transition phase at 80%.
At this point, he'll rise up into the air and start flying around the encounter area, taking 99% less damage. There's no point really fighting him during this intermission phase, you're just here to survive it. Immediately as he flies up, people will be targeted with bursting Dreadflame. This deals a very large amount of fire damage to players affected and anyone within their 15-yard targeting circle. Players with this need to quickly move away from anyone else within the raid so they explode by themselves and not on top of others. Simultaneously, the boss will also be casting Armageddon in this phase. This makes the bursting Dreadflames even more annoying to deal with, as you need to move away from the impact location so people can soak them without taking your additional damage, because otherwise that's likely to kill them. Also still in this phase is the Rupturing Singularity, which appears to only spawn in one of the 4 corners. While testing, this came in at a lot of different times, sometimes when the Dreadflames were expiring, which causes a whole new set of issues, sometimes just before the meteor started to land. We think this was either hotfixed or played with mid-fight by the devs, or perhaps phase 1 timers do not reset when you're going into the transition, which seems to be a case of bad design, but either way, you still need to deal with the Rupturing Singularities the same way, run towards them so you're not knocked off the edge of the platform. The only other thing you need to deal with in this phase is the Focused Dreadflame. The boss will target a single player and mark them with a debuff and an arrow above their head. Shortly afterwards, he'll fire a beam towards them. This beam deals lethal damage, however the damage is split between everyone within the animation. Additionally, on Heroic, players hit by the beam also do pulsing damage within 5 yards around them immediately when they're hit. So we found the best way to deal with this was either have the targeted players use an immunity whilst people move from their location, or simply have 6 players stand within the beam spread at least 5 yards apart. So you just keep dealing with all those abilities as he throws them at you and probably die a ton of times, and after a short amount of time, phase 2 will begin.
Now phase 2 is identical to phase 1, however he will keep his bursting and focused Dreadflame from the first transition. This forces you to deal with both these abilities with certain overlaps that you've already sawn while you're doing your transition, such as when meteors are landing or while you're being knocked back from the singularity, so it gets pretty damn messy. Also in this phase there is a new Shadow Reflection cast. You'll still have the old ones, you'll still have the 3 ads that do the AoE around them that you need to kill off, you'll get a new one that is targeted on your tank. After the debuff is run out, the ad will spawn and will begin to melee hit your tank, and also cast Sorrowful Wail. This cast deals quite a large amount of damage to all players within 10 yards, however each time he casts it, it deals more damage but also does it in a larger area. To add this cast is a lot faster than the previous ads, and this ad has far more health, so you're going to see quite a lot of them. We're not sure the best way to deal with this ability, but it's very likely on live servers with decent timers, you could probably just tank the ad underneath the boss, and as soon as the cast is about to start, you can just move it out and just have your ranged team to continue to nuke it. As soon as the cast is finished, move it back onto the boss and continue to cleave it down. But apart from that, that's all we really got to see.
However, thanks to the Dungeon Journal and a bit of imagination, we've got some good ideas of how the rest of the fight is going to play out, so we can at least talk through it and give our ideas about, what's going to happen.
Yes.
So, the second intermission phase will start when the boss hits 40%, and this intermission phase sounds awesome.
Yeah, so this phase apparently has completely new tech.
Yep.
There was a recent dev interview and they were quite excited about this new technology.
Yes, the Fog of War technology.
But we weren't able to see it.
Yeah.
So what happens is that again Kil'jaeden will leave the platform and he'll just engulf it in darkness. This darkness basically prevents you from targeting anything, including friendly players, unless they are within 8 yards of you. And it's also noted while this fog is up, it actually removes your ability to actually land spells on enemies. Additionally, players are slowly being choked, which seems to either apply a stronger and stronger healing absorption shield, or players just simply take less healing. We're not quite sure how they're doing that yet. Now, to remove the darkness from the platform, you actually need to kill ads that are hidden within inside it. And while these ads are up, they simply just deal unavoidable damage to the entire raid on a cast. However, in this phase, Illidan will actually join you.
Yeah, he's going to appear somewhere on the platform.
He just leaps down or something.
And what you need to do, you need to go and find him within the darkness. Then you talk to him and he gives you a 20-second buff that does put a pretty nasty dot on you, which isn't great, but it also allows you to see through the darkness. So the idea is that you find Illidan eventually, talk to him, he gives you his sight, and then you kill off all of the ads as soon as you possibly can. And then once all the ads are dead, you'll leave the transition and enter phase 3. Now, it is noted in the Dungeon Journal that this phase begins with Kil'jaeden arriving at Argus and begins to unleash his ultimate attack, Darkness of 1,000 Souls, which sounds pretty awesome. This ability seems to be the most important in the phase. Basically, bolts fly towards you and do an absolutely insane amount of damage, almost killing anyone who is targeted by it. The only way to counter this is standing by a rift, and they'll soak the damage for you. To add, flame orbs will spawn. These orbs will chase the player that is stood closest to it when it spawns. As the player runs with it, it will spawn fire behind them. It seems that this orb will chase the player forever until it finally reaches them. Once it does, it will explode and deal a large amount of damage to all players within 10 yards and spawn a large patch of fire. The size of this final fire patch from the explosion is based on how long you've kited the orb for. Basically, you want a mage or a hunter player to kite this for as long as possible and explode it when they can just no longer kite it anymore. Also, nearby rifts will remove the fires that spawn on the ground from the flame orb. So, how do these rifts spawn?
We have no idea.
We have no idea how these rifts spawn.
Absolutely no idea.
All that we do know is that it does pull players towards them, and if you're close enough to them, you'll gain a debuff called Gravity Squeeze. This debuff is required for a player to deal with the bolts. Basically, you got to stand next to the rift when you're targeted by the Darkness of 1,000 Souls bolts that are being sent at your raid, and healers just need to out-heal the dot that is applied to you from the Gravity Squeeze. So the whole phase is just going to revolve around going close to the rift when bolts are coming in, kiting these flame orbs around to make it so they explode near the rift so the fire just gets eaten up as quickly as possible, whilst also dealing with demonic obelisks that were spawning around the sides of the platform.
So this ability sounds very similar to Rupturing Singularity from the previous phases. However, it does seem like it's going to be avoidable. Instead of just dealing damage and knocking you back, it'll instead fire lines in certain directions that will deal damage to you and knock you back if you get hit. So the idea is that you just see where the lines are and avoid them. At least that's what we gather from it. And then on top of that ability, you also have the Focused Dread Flame to deal with, and you have the Bursting Dread Flame to deal with.
So yeah, this phase is going to be really easy.
Yeah, this phase is going to be really easy.
Yeah, it's going to take like about 5 seconds. It sounds insane. Just like the rest of the fight. So yeah, that is the fight, as much as we can gather from it.
Again, if we do test this again, we'll make another video.
It's very unlikely, unfortunately, because they only test the end boss once, and I think we had about like 40 minutes of uninterrupted testing on an end boss. It's quite hard to get through it, especially when it's changing all the time, especially that intermission phase. But what a cool fight.
So what do we think?
I think it's going to be incredibly active. Like the whole time when you're doing this fight, you're always thinking about what's coming next. Although phase 1 does have some very big gaps where you're kind of not really doing too much. It's very much a warm-up. But as soon as you hit that intermission phase, it's like, here's a mechanic, and it's a lot of movement, it's a lot of raid coordination as well, like trying to make it so you can get in the beam, but not too many people in the beam, or if you are going to have a lot of people in the beam, they need to be spread out. And
that's the thing I like the most about the fight. The phase, the intermission phases, I mean, we don't know necessarily for the second intermission phase yet, but it doesn't feel like, obviously, damage is just irrelevant.
Yeah.
It's can you move your character in a certain way and have full understanding of everyone around you.
Yeah.
And what debuffs they have and where they're stood.
Yeah, it's very much being able to read what everyone else is doing.
It's completely about mobility and being smart. And typically that just makes fights fun. That just makes them really, really engaging and really, really fun. However, phase 2, arguably maybe a little bit lazy. Like no new abilities. It's just shit from the previous phases. I mean, it adds on the pressure, I guess. But it feels like almost like an irrelevant phase.
I don't know, I disagree with you there. I think that when the abilities are overlapping, that's what's going to become interesting, because although the abilities, when you take them singularly, yeah, they might be a bit boring, but because they're all to do with positioning and dealing with other people in your raid, when they come in different combinations at different times, that's what's going to be difficult. Like, I can imagine a situation where you got the Focused Dread Flame, you know, the beam going towards people, as you're getting knocked back by the Rupturing Singularity, or soaking meteors, and like all of those things is going to require a lot of like pre-thought. I can imagine it getting like the way you're going to progress on this fight is overlap by overlap.
Yeah, pretty much.
Similar to how you do Gul'dan on Mythic. You get to a point and you're like, okay, we'll grind through it. Okay, this is how it does it. This is how we're going to do it. Next point now. Okay, that just one-shot us. How do we fix that? I'm just going to keep doing that. But this fight seems awesome. One thing I don't like about it, though, is, you know, the fancy background? Me alongside some other people, if you actually look at it for like more than a second, it makes you feel a bit motion sick.
Yeah.
And like, that's a bit distracting. I don't really want to be sick while I'm playing the game.
It's a bit like, you know, like the Algalon spawn animation.
Oh, God.
We look straight down at him in Ultra, and as the room starts moving.
Yeah, like it expands and stuff, yeah. But it's like permanent.
After a couple of drinks.
Yeah, but it's like permanent, and it's always going on. So we're not too happy about that, but I'm pretty sure the devs, like everyone was saying it in general chat, I'm sure it's all over the forums as well, like, can you not have like this horrible swirling background? I'm gonna vomit everywhere.
I think they'll be fine for 200 pulls.
Oh God, let's not. But either way, guys, thank you very much for watching. If you did enjoy this video, then make sure you leave a like on it. It helps us out a lot. And of course, a huge thank you to all of our supporters over on Patreon for allowing us to do what we do. You guys are awesome. Thank you so much. And we shall see you next time.
Thanks for watching.
Thank you.